Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Teacher Talk with Doc Rocker. As always, I'm your host, Russ Downey, and with me, as always, today is Danton Arlato of Doc Rocker Music. How's it
Hi.
going, Danton?
It's been a while. Here we are.
I
This
feel
is
like I just
very
woke up from a
exciting.
long nap.
Yeah, we've been slumbering for quite a bit. Even with both of our podcast channels, things have, since we kind of entered this post-pandemic environment, we've gotten super busy super quick. So like all of this fun online stuff we launched kind of took a backseat to life for a good deal of time. At
Hmm.
this at the time of this video, a couple months in between our last Teacher Talk podcast post and this one. So we're super excited to have another topic to talk about, and we're even more excited to bring on a guest. We have a very special guest on the podcast this week, close friend and colleague of mine from Westchester University. We were in the same piano studio for a couple of classes. Let me introduce Mr. Joseph Kenny.
Hey, what's up, everybody?
Yo, what's
Danton
up?
We are super happy to have you on the show.
here, excited to be here. And yeah, the post-pandemic era it's a good thing
Yeah,
in a
it's
way.
good. We're all busy again, right?
Need a jolt to get back to this awesome podcast. So I'm thankful you guys are having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. So Joe, what are we talking about today?
Yeah, so since the pandemic, I've had a lot of performances. I'm both a performer and a teacher, and picking back up with some students in person, some different angles and revelations in that way. One thing that I've been focusing on is that intersection of teaching and performing, and the ways in which some students really challenge you and make you think differently, not only about how you convey messages to them, but also some messages for your own performing when you're kind of in that space and in that world. So, yeah.
Yeah, I feel like that's going to be a pretty good topic, not just for us, but for hopefully anyone watching, because I feel like there's always some degree of that overlap between instructor and performer. All of us teachers are performers to some extent, even those of us who aren't active professional performers. You don't have to be a concert pianist to be considered a performer. If you
Hmm.
play for Sunday morning church, if you play
Right.
for a family wedding, if you perform in any degree to any capacity, you definitely can tap into that experience and tie it into your teaching. And I think that's going to be a fun thing for us to explore today.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's an interesting discussion too because you always wind up having this like interesting spectrum of music teachers and how much they perform. You have some that perform a little and teach a lot, some that do that, more at even levels, some that do a ton of performing and some teaching on the side. So it's always interesting to see the different perspectives of how that affects everybody and how they handle it based off the way they actually comport themselves based off of what they do.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I think there's different levels of it. I perform and teach both a lot, but to Danton's point too, that any level of performing, you can glean some things from your teaching,
Mhm.
and it's really inspiring to be able to help others, but also say, hey, maybe here's a breakthrough here where I can help myself a little bit that I haven't even thought of, even though I'm doing it every day in lessons.
Yeah,
So
yeah, even doing your own lessons with students, and then you always get that. I should start practicing what I preach all the time to my students, and it can really, if done right, it can positively influence your own performing career. I know I could tap into that experience a bit, especially rewinding back to pandemic days. I used to live stream practice sessions on Instagram all the time because I was like, oh, cool, I'm sitting around in my studio and nothing to do. Let me kind of find another way to kind of showcase for my students what the process is like. Because as a musician, we get so focused on the finished product. You focus on the recital or the gig or the final presentation of everything you've prepared. But I thought it would be really interesting to let the students see, like, oh, here it is when it's under construction, because even us teachers, we're not perfect. We all had to start somewhere and learn and grow, and we all continue to do so. Even today, you can see the pile of music on my piano stand of things I need to work on. Um, but yeah, there's always that fun, that kind of duality of being a teacher and a player, and you kind of tap into your teaching experience, Joe, like you said, when you're doing practice sessions too, thinking about, well, what are all those things I keep hearing myself telling my students, and how can they apply to me? as a performer. So, and even kind of going a little deeper into Joe, your topic idea, how certain types of students can influence and shape us as performers more so than ourselves. I thought that topic was really, really interesting, and looking forward to talking about it a little bit.
Absolutely. So
Yeah.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Joe.
No, I'm saying I'm looking forward to it too. This is a lot of good stuff to get to.
Yeah, well, so you sent me some pretty detailed notes via
Mhm.
Facebook chat when we scheduled this a couple weeks ago. So I took it all and have it copied up here on the chat. So I'm going to read some of your talking points, and we'll kind of use that to get started. So the topic for today: dual teacher and professional performer, the ways in which certain types of students can influence and shape us as performers. And because Facebook didn't let me copy all the message, I had to do it piece by piece for some reason. So, the talking points. Every now and then you run into a student, and these are Joe's words, who has the makings of a potential prodigy, or at least seemingly a career in music. I, Joe, have a particular student who has the ability to pick up on everything I say, to understand college level music theory, to implement the concepts I give him in his pieces and his own compositions. This presents me with challenges as a teacher that have positive residual effects as a performer. A, since he's maxing out my knowledge of jazz theory by his ability to understand concepts that shape my own improvisation skills, it has forced me to learn more to impart more specifics. And the deadline of weekly points and wanting to be present and accountable for that student's progress. This has expanded my own personal knowledge. So maybe we could stop there and go into that a little bit before we get on to B and C, because I think there's an A, B, C to this first point. Yeah.
There's first point's got a few different points too, and then there's two other points as well.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So yeah, especially I keep forgetting, Joe, that you're like this perfect like double dip as, classically trained pianist and jazz performer. I don't know why I keep forgetting that, because I see all your posts on Instagram and I see you jamming on cool jazz tunes, and I know you're quite an accomplished classical pianist as well.
Thank
So
you.
yeah, so
Yeah,
let's talk about it a little bit.
I can't stay in my own lane, I think so. Or stay focused. So I'm bouncing back and forth, but I appreciate you spitting. So, yeah, but the student I'm talking about, classical and jazz, he understands so much theory right from the bat, just an uncanny ability to understand concepts, but not only that, to apply them too. So, and which is great. I think it's just a dream come true in a sense that I can throw ideas off the student who's about, when I started with him, maybe 10, he's 14 now, and but I mean, the ability to understand like college level theory, and then analyze pieces with that knowledge, to take a concept that I send him home with and implement it into pieces he writes himself. Like, it's just incredible. And with any student, they're going to ask questions. Some of his questions were stumped me, honestly, and I think that's great. At first, the ego is like, oh darn, like I gotta up my game, but then I step back, pause, say it less me to myself, and then go to the drawing board. And it's just a cool symbiotic relationship where I'm teaching this student, and he's also teaching me and pushing my boundaries to make sure I can keep feeding him stuff that forwards him and that matches his like lightning pace. So yeah, it's fun.
Now, how long have you been working with this student?
I want to say about 5 years, 5 or 6
Oh
years.
wow.
Oh wow. How is he, like a high school kid, or
So now, yeah, he started when he was around like 9 or 10. He's 14. He's in high school. He's doing the jazz band like as a freshman.
Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
And I had started him on method books, and he was just flying through it. My particular approach, I like to start with maximizing what they can handle with the theory. It's just an easy way to get into it, and then show them, hey, this theory will pop up in songs you love, no matter who the student is. Like, this will be valuable, even if you're doing a song you might find maybe tedious. So I like to get the theory ahead of where the method books are. And that and with him, he just ate everything up, and it was just super impressive right from day one. So
Awesome.
yeah.
Those students are always refreshing.
It's always an interesting feeling, like having a student who absorbs the information that quickly that you're like, well, what do I do now?
It gets kind of scary. I love that, terrifying. Like, what do I even do with this kid? I definitely have a handful of students like that too, and it's, you know, like you said, Joey, it's kind of scary. Like, kind of like it's like a big wake up call for you as a teacher. Like, oh yeah, it's that nice, that lovely reminder to all of us that we don't know everything. And when you could easily get stagnant teaching, like if you're doing it long enough and you have enough of a student body and you kind of find yourself going through the motions and teaching things you've already taught 1,000 times, you know, as much as I absolutely love the Bach Minuet in G from the Anna Magdalena book, I've taught that piece like so many times to so many students that I could play it in my sleep. I could teach it in my sleep. And I still love that piece, but there's not really much challenge to it anymore. But when you get a student that challenges you in a way that, like, oh yeah, it takes you back to like when you first started as a teacher, and you're like on that constant state of pressure of, I have to come up with something, I have to say something meaningful, I have to really show this kid that I know my stuff and that I'm smart and that I'm worth spending time with in lessons. You know, and there's always a lot of pressure, and it ties in a lot to the pressure that I feel as a performer too, where you have to present this wonderful finished product, this rehearsed piece of music. Presenting it in a lesson is really similar in a lot of ways, and I've always been fascinated by that too.
Yeah. So yeah, no, those are all good points. I think that like accountability in any field and showing a finished product and just being on is important, especially as a performer and teacher. It's just, you got to give feedback right away. And the ego piece is interesting too. You mentioned like, oh man, like am I worth this kid's time? Got to show him his boss. No, and I make a joke with the parents, like he's going to be taking my gigs soon, and I say it only half jokingly at this time. The percentage of joking just gets less each time, because you know, and I think there does, as the dual piano teacher and performer and doing them both at a lot, I think there's some of that ego you need to keep in check. Like, I want to be transparent with the parents, like with his parents, if you know, if there's ever a time where we think that we should move on to a teacher who might be better suited, based on not necessarily assessing just quote unquote worth, but more fit and trajectory, depending on what the ultimate goals are, to be open to that too. So I think there's a balance of keeping that ego in check, and also just saying, yeah, you need to be accountable and do your best and push what you know, learn new repertoire yourself, repertoire that fits what you're trying to convey. Might not be the Bach Minuet anymore, or the Bach G one too, which is another favorite. So
yeah.
I think this is one of those situations where, like, and Dan, I think you touched upon this briefly, where when you're a new teacher, you feel like you constantly have to, like, you have to be on all the time. Kind of like being like a stand-up comedian almost, in that like you have to keep like the hits rolling, essentially, in that like if you're not constantly on, that all of a sudden you get this creeping feeling that like maybe they think I don't know enough or know what I'm talking about. And the thing is that like I think that eventually works its way, and I'm sure the two of you could attest to this, is that like as you get more experience teaching, that kind of works its way out. And we all have limitations as performers and teachers as well. Certain areas that we've spent more time studying in, and other areas that we've spent less time studying in. And I almost kind of think of it like I'm going to show my video game nerd here. I almost kind of think of it as the same principle as like playing a game where you wind up putting like points into different skills, and all of us kind of come to the table with different specialties. And sometimes you have a student who winds up being like the same type of person, becomes the same type of performer. It's almost kind of interesting to wind up exploring new areas and sharing that with that student as well, because it's something you may not know as well, but they also get a chance to discover it at the same time. And I can give you a good example too, because maybe up until about 2 or 3 years ago, the majority of the piano students that I had, and other instrumental students as well, most of the stuff that I was teaching them was mostly the way that I had learned certain things. Like when it came time for piano, most of it was method books and a lot more on the classical side, with some jazz for those who could handle it. But in the past few years, I've started to acquire, and some would say gear acquisition syndrome, starting to actually like pick up analog and old analog style synthesizers and get into more into that like prog and rock side of things, even stretching someone into like the field of what Herbie Hancock was doing on like the Headhunters album, using like an ARP Odyssey for the bass part for which one, for Chameleon. And like that has been a great thing in getting a chance to share with my students, who I've seen go from not only just learning classical style piano, but also getting a chance to stretch into something that we don't always get a chance to touch upon, especially whereas for piano players and keyboardists, the technology was such a huge ancillary part of the field by comparison to other instruments. Like you don't see people reinventing the trumpet with like analog circuits on it to create some different sounds to it. So that's kind of an interesting thing to tap into. It's kind of like you're kind of discovering that and getting a chance to share that with your students as well, and guaranteed it's brand new to them too.
Yeah, I've always kind of really liked that, just jumping into uncharted territory with a student. Those are honestly for me the kind of lessons that I crave. Like, yeah, here's this kid who's coming along that wants to do this particular area of music that I've never explored myself. So I always, and I usually, just like Joe, how you said, you're usually really honest and transparent with the parents, at least as far as giving your own background and like, here's what I'm really confident in my abilities to do and to teach, and here's things that I don't really know. I usually have that conversation with parents too, like, hey, look, we're going into untreaded waters here, and we're going to be exploring a lot of this together, where we're both going to be learning about it as we go. And I think in general, a lot of parents are usually really positive in receiving that information, because they appreciate your honesty and your enthusiasm, and also how well that you can connect with their student through that process. And that makes for a really strong relationship between student and teacher, which only then further propels that momentum for future endeavors. Like, for me, more of my challenge areas in teaching come from classical. Like, okay, here's a kid who's coming in who's doing this piece of repertoire that I've never done. So like, I'm going to be sitting here like, I have a high school kid right now that I literally have to practice his music, because I can't just play it and show him and demonstrate things for him. So that's been the ongoing journey for the past like year with this kid of, now we're like our third, fourth, fifth piece into the repertoire. And we kind of made like this niche click where we kind of have a chemistry with each other that is influencing our current work very positively.
That's so cool. Yeah. With learning pieces of other students, that's funny because I'm experiencing that. I'm learning a couple of the Gershwin preludes for the same purpose.
Very cool. Very cool.
Yeah, and it's necessary to just be able to keep up with just bringing some back. Like I had done maybe one of them before, but it just seemed like the right next step in the student's trajectory, but it's not something I had necessarily kept in the fingers, or even on the case of the first one I had learned. But yeah, going back to your point of dancing about the parents appreciating, just being open and honest about your limitations, your strengths, all that. I think connection is the most important thing. I think that definitely supersedes, this veil that you might know everything, because no one does. I think if you have that trust, you have that enthusiasm, and you're telling the parents, hey, or, whomever, the objective is to, do what's best for the student. And I think that's refreshing. And if you're saying that with enthusiasm and you truly mean it, then I think any of your limitations, they can be overcome, or you can dive in with the student and access new realms, like you said.
Yeah, and that'll ultimately help you grow as a teacher too, because then you have even more experience to tap into for the next student who comes into your ranks.
Mm-hmm.
We're always, even as teachers, I think a lot of students kind of fail to grasp that concept at first, especially younger kids, that we're all still students as well. We're all still learning as we teach. We're learning new things all the time. You know, the best of us are ever growing as musicians, ever expanding our horizons, trying new things, and having these really this fun special breed of student who can challenge us like this is really good for us teachers and our own musical growth.
Absolutely. I mean, a big part of it, and I think you make an important point there too, Dan, is that like to get across to the student that we're still students too. We're still learning. I mean, like there's if anybody, if I were a parent of a student who's looking for lessons and a teacher came to me and said, yeah, I know it all. I got it. I'll teach them anything. I'd be like, you'd be the first one out the door. Only because of the fact that like, if you can't be honest about like what you do know and what you're not so comfortable with, then honestly, you're not going to at least be able to be honest with the student as of like, this is the stuff I know. This is the stuff I'm not so sure about or personally, but I'm totally willing to help you discover this. Because I think the one thing that I've discovered more and more after having been out of college is that like being in a music ed program very much preps you for approaching teaching like music students are kind of a monolith of sorts. I'm going somewhere with this, in that like we all kind of were used to that style of student, like in the public school setting where, you're a band student, you're an orchestra student, you're a choral student. And basically the path is you either go to the end of high school and perform and that's it. Or, you may do stuff outside of it, or you go on to music school. And that may be like 3% of people in general. But I've started to discover that like the pathways that the majority of my students have, and I'm sure it happens for both of you as well, it's such a branching type of thing rather than a linear path that like half the fun of teaching the students is to see where their interests develop. Like Dan, I know you've got quite a few students that are very interested in learning video game music, as I do as well.
Mhm.
And like you wouldn't see that necessarily happen if they were like more on a classical track, moving towards being a performer in a classical setting. But like it brings up an interesting point of where the pathway of these students go. And not to get super philosophical here either, do you guide their pathway? Do their parents guide it? Does the student guide it? And I think a lot of that, like, and Joe, it sounds like this particular student you're talking about basically sounds like they're on track to go to school, almost if they'd be going to like a conservatory type of situation almost. It's one of those things where you may have like 1 out of 50 students throughout a period of time that wind up being able to do that. And that's awesome too, because you may not get that experience from any other students for a long time. So it's like I said, I'm making a bit of a point here, but I think as we get more experience as teachers, we start to see all these different branching paths. And I think that's half the fun of it. And honestly, I think it's just as interesting for us to figure out where they're going as it is for them. So I think the biggest thing that helps is like forming that interpersonal relationship, working with the student, knowing what they want to learn, knowing how to help them. And I'll touch on this later, how that teacher student relationship also plays a part in what they perceive as being important from the lessons too, because otherwise I'm going to start making too many points all at once. Which I'm known to do from time to time.
That's why we love you, Russell. Yeah, it's great, kind of exploring some of these concepts and talking about this. We've kind of already circled through the other 2 points on this one topic, B and C here, where Joe states that, this student is picking up idioms of my own style in soloing and hearing it in other performers, my student, and giving active feedback on it colors my own interpretation of my own musical language in jazz and soloing.
That was actually something I wanted to ask you about, Joe.
There we go.
Yeah, well,
Let's do it.
Yeah, I always find it interesting. Like, I'm always curious how other teachers teach soloing, because it is such a personal pathway for teaching how to improvise in the first place that you could ask 50 different teachers and get 50 different ways. I know, you said your students starting to pick up a lot of your personal idioms for soloing, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yes.
Do you guys get a chance to take a look at examples of like other performers soloing, like watching video clips or any of that kind of stuff?
Yeah. So Um, actually, to hearken to your point about the approach and the branching of students, I think the idea of it being customizable, Russ, is so true. And I think that was the fact that you need to tailor your approach to each individual student. You need to be versatile. The fact that you do like synth playing now and you're incorporating that, that is so cool. That's awesome.
It helps. I'm a huge Genesis fan.
There you go. That's awesome. But like to offer that, and I'm sure like you can play some like classical pieces and all that. So to be just the fact that you're versatile. I'm not necessarily sure of your like entire background, but I know that.
So
important too.
So I know like Danton could probably explain this too, because we were at school at West Chester at the same time, but my main instrument is actually percussion. It's been for years upon years, but I started taking piano about age 13 or 14, but it's what I strongly consider to be my secondary instrument. But what got me into playing keyboards was, and there again, you can hear just by the way I approach calling it that, a lot of it was from the music I was listening to. So I opted to take piano lessons, one, because I had a rough idea that I was going to probably go to teach music and it'd be good to know it before I showed up to college. But I always had this huge interest in like the actual like synthesizer and keyboard and organ sounds. That kind of drove me towards that, and learning the classical side of the piano as well helped me to kind of get in the mind of some of my favorite performers. And I know like one of Danton's favorites, Rick Wakeman from Yes, who you could tell was classically trained. But then he takes that principle and applies it to like every new technological medium that was out throughout like the 70s and 80s and all these different synths. Just watching, like, I always thought it was really cool seeing all these keyboardists have like these forts of keyboards around them on stage. I realize now, many, many years later, that's because the technology was so limited, you needed it for different sounds. But at the same time, I really like when the two concepts combine so much, combine that way. And I think it's really cool, especially because like on the jazz side of it, you get people like Chick Corea, who was like an absolute pioneer in use of things like the Minimoog Model D to use for soloing, using a monophonic instrument with the limitations it has. It's almost similar to the way, you know, early video game composers could only deal with so many notes at once to create something. So I find that side of it interesting, but I don't have quite the same like classical background both you and Danton have, especially with like the heavy duty formal piano training as a piano major in college. But it's fun.
Yeah. We tend to frequently joke that Russ is a pianist / keyboardist stuck in a drummer's body, you know, or like his ambitions and his background and his expertise stem so far beyond just one instrument. It's really, really great.
I find it ironic too, because Danton and I share a similarity in certain situations with this, in that I am a percussionist who is more enamored with buying keyboard equipment, and he is a pianist who is more enamored with buying guitar equipment.
Yeah, as used to be evident in my office, I used to have all my guitar collection on display. But since we moved to this new apartment, this office room is a little smaller than the one I had, so it got a little tight. So I actually packed up all the extra guitars. I leave out my Telecaster because that's my favorite to practice on.
I leave out the bass.
Yeah, so I used to have like just a whole rack of guitars right next to the piano, so I could I just have this nice, lovely toy collection of things to play with. And you know, anyway, but that's neither here nor there.
That's awesome. And the background's a vibe for sure. So
that's new. That's freshly. I just installed all this week. You know, all my lovely posters and things.
Loving it.
Like to give it a splash of color, because deep down I'm just a gamer. But you know,
maybe
the music
like
for fun.
Post-production, some things in my background, just so I can compete with y'all.
I just got to get proficient with Photoshop first.
But I think like versatility is the name of the game. And Russ, to come back to your point, like, and you guys, both of you, obviously dancing with guitar and piano, and Russ, you with drums, piano, and it is a different beast. Synths, you know what I mean? I'm more of a pianist than keyboardist. I'm still trying to, you know, work on that skill and express myself through the synth a lot better. I'd consider myself, you know, pretty new to, I have a lot to learn in terms of keyboard. I think we all do, but I mean, I'm more the opposite, where I'm more of a pianist than a keyboardist. But I think in terms of, to bring it back to your point about teaching and soloing and all the way back to this particular student who tries to incorporate idioms of what I do in soloing, my approach with this student who's also really good at theory, it's kind of multi-pronged, was to understand, like making sure he understands how different scales that you can implement, knows how to play those scales. And that's stuff that he just took to. He's a fish in water with all that stuff. So, but then it comes down to just expression and more philosophical comments. What are you trying to say? There's different ways to say it. You can say
I literally had this written down in his notes. I can't wait to hear what you have to say about this. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Yeah. So, pressure's on now. I better deliver. No. Yeah. So I will show my student different things that I would do on a solo. And I'd like to talk about building a story, starting with small motives and transforming them rhythmically and throughout the keys. Different moods you're trying to evoke and how different little scales or turnarounds can be conversational in different ways. I talk about keeping it simple and staying with the melody, giving somebody something to hold on to, and then to use that to kind of navigate and almost manipulate their expectations and take them on an emotional journey. I lost my, there I am. Sorry. So, and then, transcribing is a big thing. That's something personally as a performer, I need to do more. I need to transcribe solos. Somebody's done it really well before. You might as well learn exactly what they did, transcendent of what the theory was.
All the better reason to assign it to your students too. You kind of give yourself that task as well. Like, hey, listen to solo A, B, and C and chart out to the best of your ability, and then I'll do the same, and then we compare notes. That can make for great lesson material for both of you to explore. And that feeds right into this loop of you growing as a performer and as a teacher as well.
Oh yeah, exactly.
You never forget about transcriptions. They're very, very powerful teaching tools.
Yeah, just unlock, just totally unlock things you wouldn't have thought about before, or like, you can have all the theory in the world, but until you heard how a transcription can be, like how to see it in front of you and to be able to execute solos is just invaluable.
So I got a question for you. So like if you had to pick out some solos that you would use as examples to show this particular student or any student, like some of your favorite ones to use, do you have any particular favorites? Not to put you right on the spot.
So yeah, there are a few, and a lot are maybe kind of stretching. I for example, like one of the recent jazz standards we're working on is with my student is Blue Skies. And one thing I go to with some of the harder transcriptions is to find someone else who has done that. So for example, like there's a whole book of Art Tatum transcriptions, but it's in like E flat and it's kind of brutal. But there's stuff that's doable for both him and me that I have him look at in that. He's playing it in E minor, but it's good to work in different keys. So I have him do it a step lower in the E flat so he can refer to the transcription and then correspondingly listen to the version of Art Tatum playing it. There's another Bill Evans solo too, where there's access to a transcription. The name of the specific tune is eluding me, but it's just you get such a window in and just the sonic picture, even pulling out a couple measures, whether it's a transcription of the whole piece, but that's going to take some time. Or even if you pull out a couple measures of some of what someone like Art Tatum or Bill Evans is doing, you can start incorporating it into your vocabulary. And I know personally that that's something that I didn't necessarily honestly do as a performer. That's somewhere that I have good performing instincts. And I think, as I mentioned, the jazz theory is where he's pushing me. So I think this is somewhere where I'm needing to step up my game. I think in terms of composing and theory of chords and connecting different scales and different creative ways to scope out a progressive jazz piece or a rock piece, like in terms of those compositional ways, I still got him for a while. But I mean, like, the transcriptions is just, that's what I meant about it's a legit challenge. And I just so it's definitely an area where I'm a student for sure as well. But I mean, but I'm hearing him play not only ways that I would play, he also likes playing some of my songs too, which is super cool, which is just always a cool thing to a big ego boost for sure.
Yeah. Well, especially when you're dealing with a student that challenges you as a teacher, to get that nice kind of satisfaction of knowing that he sees some value in your own work and he likes what you're doing. That really reassures you that he likes your style, he likes what you're offering him, and it's what you're doing is working, at least to an extent. So you get those nice little reminders that you're doing something right. And
For
that's
sure.
always really reassuring, especially in a situation like that where you kind of need that a little more than with maybe some other students.
I think that actually brings me to, and it's a perfect segue to set up. Thank you, Dan. That actually brings me to one of the things I kind of wanted to talk about, which is your second point, which talks about trying to consider what's best for the student, even if that means looking for other teachers, and even them potentially outgrowing us as teachers as well. It's an interesting concept too, because I feel like I've heard examples before, and I've had students of mine who wound up having other teachers who were definitely more well versed in a particular like specific area, whether it be classical music, but like the interpersonal type of situation was like so much down towards the floor that it wasn't even enjoyable for them to learn or even to play. That like I sometimes wonder if that's even, if it's almost a 50-50 split between like them enjoying you as a teacher and the interpersonal up along with what they're actually getting from the lesson itself. Because, and I'm sure both of you can attest to this as well, you've probably both had any kind of lessons with a performer who was a great performer, but or even a good teacher, but didn't have like the personal skills for it to make it like enjoyable for somebody to learn from them, or was a great performer but couldn't translate it as a teacher. So I sometimes wonder.
Unfortunately, I can't say I relate to that. I've been extremely fortunate in all of my experience as a student, where both of my primary piano teachers, my childhood teacher growing up, and my professional teacher at the collegiate level, they were both excellent. They were excellent performers. They were just, to me, they were perfect in every way. They were great players. They were super well versed in their knowledge, in their background, and they both shared everything they got with me, and I did nothing but thrive with both of them. I never like, I hear that all the time though, especially in the music world, like, oh, I have these differences with my teacher. He's such a great performer and he's such a great player, but he doesn't communicate that well to me in the lessons, and I don't feel like I'm learning or growing as much as I could. I feel like I've plateaued. I hear those kinds of horror stories all the time, and I kind of sit there and kind of silently like just put my back up against the wall, like, not me.
Well, I should specify, I didn't necessarily mean you guys specifically as students, but like that you've probably heard those stories before.
Oh yeah, I've heard them all the time. Yeah, and that's exactly the kind of teacher that we all aspire to not be. The one like, for me, like, I'm definitely more of a teacher than a player, and
Same.
For me, like, if a student kind of sees me as like an excellent performer, I just see that as like a bonus. Like, oh, he just happens to be really good. Like, I want any student who likes me to first and foremost say they like me as a teacher, because of how I would have helped them grow and develop.
This
Yeah.
is why like the whole statement of like those who can do and those who can't teach drives me up a wall.
Yeah, I have no idea where that comes from. That is the silliest, stupidest statement that blows my mind that people even think that, because it's certainly not true, especially in music. At
Mhm.
least in music. I don't know about other fields. I don't know much more than music, but yeah.
No, I think you're right. I think both you guys and Danton, that's interesting. That's your personal experience that you had, that great intersection of like the great performers and great teachers. I had a little different experience on my journey as a student where um, I had someone that was well versed in composition, not necessarily a piano performer, but the wisdom he imparted upon me when I was in high school was incredible and so meaningful, and even technique too. And his angle through what the composer was trying to um, say, and what the chord changes meant, and how the technique to execute that aligns with like even like the harmony and what's happening and where to apply weight differently. Like he wasn't much of a performer in relation to another teacher who followed, who as a foil, so this past teacher, he had moved away out of the country, and then I got set up with a pretty renowned in some circles, like pianist, concert pianist, very confident, a lot of skill as a performer, decorated career. But in turn, and there's something to be said for when you give hands-on examples as a performer. There's inspiring moments, and you can't undersell how important inspiration is, and just picking up by osmosis and all that stuff. But he was not necessarily versatile as a teacher in understanding that people have different ways of receiving the information. And I think they're both an art. So yeah, that saying is ridiculous because teaching is an art. It's just like baseball managers. You have baseball managers who are super effective who haven't played baseball or who haven't played to the extent of an all-star level. You have superstars. I'm a big Phillies fan. Joe Girardi was the Phillies manager. He
Mhm.
played. He
Yeah,
was
I was gonna say it sounds like this is coming from someone who's a Phillies fan, given the recent history of that team.
Oh, here,
But
this is gonna be fun.
I
uh,
remember, I don't know
how
squat
much
about
how much time
You
baseball.
can see the Flyers thing in the
But
background.
yeah, my
yeah.
dad is also a big Phillies fan, and I was talking to him like 2 or 3 weeks ago, and he mentioned when they had the new manager that came in or whatever. And I remember like, oh, I hear, just because everyone around this area is of course a big Phillies fan. I am not, but all my friends are, all my family are. And I remember like talking to my dad and being like, oh, it's good they got rid of that old manager. He seemed like he really didn't know what he was talking about. He wasn't a good fit for the team. And then my dad corrected me. He said, no, he was one of the best managers like ever. He was extremely knowledgeable and really, and he saw like the Yankees get to the World Series or something like that. I forget. He has some kind of
He
like
did,
real
yeah.
big pinpoint thing that he achieved. And I was totally baffled to learn that. And it was just, oh, it was just a case of bad chemistry, that he didn't work well with that team. He didn't communicate his methods to the
I
Phillies
I think that
in a way that was
happens
effective at all.
in not only just sports, but in like in teaching and anything much more than we probably would give credence to, because
Yeah.
like you wind up having situations where you just have, and especially for music and especially for lesson teaching, you'll have cases where you have teachers and students who just don't really gel as like a student teacher type of situation, and like it it becomes, it's usually pretty apparent early on, but it sometimes can become like even more apparent as time goes on as well. And that's a situation where I completely agree, like, it might be best to help them find a teacher who might work better with them personally, because I think it's you make a good point there, Danton, and you as well, Joe, that I think like it plays a bigger part than we would give credit to. But you could see a student, for example, and I'm always going to say this, that like hard work tends to, always win out above innate natural skill without putting the work into it. You could see a student of a, maybe like a slightly lesser innate natural skill be much better than somebody who had the natural skill but had a teacher that they really didn't gel with or didn't feel, motivated to work on something with, versus the opposite situation. And I always find that interesting too, because that means that the interpersonal is quite important as well.
Absolutely.
I could give some examples as to like greatest hockey player in existence in history, Wayne Gretzky. awful coach. Like sometimes, honestly, and this is the thing, like some people who are absolutely fantastic performers and have the greatest ability, it's so innate for some of them that they can't translate it for other people.
Yeah, I could definitely understand that. At least area of lacking from a teacher's experience. Like if you're performing in Carnegie Hall when you're like 9,
Mhm.
like do you really know what it's like to not be able to play the piano? You know
Mhm.
what I mean? Uh, you
Yeah,
know,
for sure.
no jabs against performers and teachers of that caliber, but I feel like there's definitely something to be said about that. That's really, really interesting.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's a good point, and I'm so glad you're a big sports fan, Russ. We'll have to sidebar at some point. When we
Oh
have,
yeah,
maybe not,
don't get me
but
started ranting on the Flyers. We'll be here for a while.
Yeah, well, that'll be a whole different episode of the podcast. Teacher Talk does sports. And we just talk about
Russ,
nothing
Russ
related to
just goes
music.
off on Philly sports for 3 hours.
I'm
That's all
here.
right.
I'm here for that.
That's all right. We already have more credibility than half the Philly sports media, and we're talking music.
Oh man, you're bringing up so many Philly sports media. Oh man, so negative, so negative.
Oh, I know.
It's like
It's a big
here's
reason
why
I stay away from all of it.
Bryce Harper MVP. Here's why we're gonna get rid of him.
Oh my god.
What do you think, Philly? It's like no, we're not trying to be volatile at all.
Oh my god. Oh man.
What, Phillies fans not being volatile?
No, it's not. It's not just Phillies fans. It's just Philadelphia sports fans in general. It's like, starting quarterback had a bad game, and the backup came in and scored 2 touchdowns. Quarterback controversy in Philadelphia? Question mark.
Yeah, and I mean honestly, the Phillies got blown out last night, so I'm not even listening to the radio as much as they love the new manager. I'm like, I'm not here for the couple calls that are going to say fire the new guy who's been killing it.
God. And
Yeah,
you know,
of course you're gonna hear that.
Yes.
Guaranteed.
At some point, it's my fault for turning on one of those 2 channels.
You know it's coming.
Oh,
But no, I mean, I guess to kind of steer back, because we are still circling around the right point. Like that chemistry thing plays such a big part in it that like I can definitely understand. And you guys know as well as I do, like there are students who are music for them is an enjoyment type of thing, and there are some students where like you can tell they're kind of like destined for that performer level type of thing, where it's like it's not that they won't enjoy it, but there's a different motivation at work.
yeah, I can understand that.
And that's always interesting too, about like, finding a teacher that would work well with them. And hopefully sometimes that's you, and sometimes when it isn't, that happens too. And that's tough sometimes not to take that personally.
Absolutely.
Because you'd be like, well, I'm a good teacher. Why aren't I good enough for them? No,
I know those things. Why not me? It's like being last to be picked on like the kickball team in gym. Like, I'm a good kicker, I swear.
Definitely don't have personal experience in that.
Yeah, now that I have a lot of experience in, but yeah, not so much with the music thing. But
yeah, I think chemistry is certainly important. I think
yeah, absolutely.
yeah, and the X's and O's and important too. And motivation, like you said, Russ. Like everybody has different motivation, and you have to kind of find the sweet spot of the parents' motivation, the kids' motivation, what you think that the kid's ceiling might be, and then you're just firm fundamental beliefs. You have to weigh all of that if you're gonna, I think, succeed with a student load who everybody's different.
Oh, absolutely. And and I'm curious for both of you guys, because I know for a large number of my students, the parents are usually more on the side of like, I just want my kid to get involved and, get involved in some music and something that they'll enjoy doing. Do you guys get many parents of students who are more like, no, I want them to be like performing in concert halls?
I have a few of those. Yeah, and that's pretty cool. I think that you have a majority that it's like, I want them to learn. I'm going to trust your expertise, and it sounds like a healthy approach. I have a lot of students that's the same kind of thing, but I have some others that, expectations and benchmarks are important.
Mhm.
you know I mean, I grew up the same way, so I empathize and understand it. um you also want to do what's best for the student. Some people, want the ABRSM exams to be done, and because
Mhm.
it looks good on the resume. And I think there's more and more pressure on kids to do
Be
so many,
competitive. Yeah.
and it's rough. I think in a comical sense, I was talking about it with somebody the other day. Um, the expectations of like, okay, I want my son to play Chopin in year one, but also we're going to take off for half the summer. So like that type of, that's not an exactitude, but I
Yeah.
think
Here's the sheet music. Hope you bring a piano to the beach. Good
so
luck.
I think it's important to, first of all, yes, be adaptable, but also understand and yourself help set and guide expectations off the bat. Obviously, people take divergent paths, and you have the branching paths like Russ was talking about. I think it's important to understand the goals, but also remind them it's music. It's not, there is competition in music if you want, but that's not the crux of it. Um, while also being respectful that, hey, honestly, these are the people that are paying you. This is what they want for their children. No, there's definitely a debate. Could be a debate there, but I think
Oh,
it's
oh, there
it's a
definitely is,
Yeah,
and
there
I can't wait to
definitely
jump
could
into
be.
it.
I think
Yeah.
it's a balance.
I strangely don't really get those specific kind of requests. Like, granted, I have many parents that typically just sign their kid up just to get them involved in something. The kid expresses an interest in music, parent wants to sign them up for piano lessons. That's the norm for me. But for a lot of my more serious students, even like out the gate, it was the parent approaching, hey, my son is like really, really into this, or hey, my daughter has taken lessons for the last 3 years and she really loves it and her teacher left and we now need a replacement. I've gotten situations like that much more often. But even like I kind of like I have this one kid that I'm thinking about that ties into this one kid of Joe's that we are talking about, where he was a self-taught classically trained pianist and he worked for several years on his own. He didn't even join my ranks until his senior year of high school. So, and he had no previous experience with a teacher, but the expectation from the parents was, hey, he's really serious about it. Not so much to the point of he wants to like go to conservatory and pursue it professionally, but he's a real serious student who's going to practice a lot and he can play some really advanced material. Do what you can with him before he graduates. And for me, it was fun. It was challenge accepted. Like, this is going to be great. This is going to help me grow, and this is going to be awesome. I never get students like this. They're always so few and far between. But those expectations from the parents were always really generous and fair. It was always just kind of go nuts and have fun with them. It wasn't, I've had one recent client who reached out and mentioned specifically, like, I have two boys and they both study and I want them to play at a certain level on ABRSM, but I was fortunate to be in a position where I ended up setting them up with another teacher in the first place because my roster was full. But if I had not been in that situation and if I was taking that, I'm not sure how I'd feel about that because I never really get that specific of a request. I don't know if I mean for my gut's telling me I'd probably just be excited about the challenge. Like, sure, let's do it. That's awesome. I've never done anything with ABRSM. I've always
Yeah.
been curious to learn more about it. Doing this with your student or with your kids will help me to grow as a teacher and be more knowledgeable about the different levels and how it works. That would be awesome. I know I would definitely take it with an open mind, but I could easily understand teachers who would be put off by that of, no, you're paying me, you're trusting me as the professional. Let's do the methods that I know that will work rather than what the parent thinks the student wants. And that kind of ties back into that thing we were talking about before of who decides what's the best path for the student to take. Is it the student? Is it his or her parents? Is it the teacher? Is it some hybridization of all three of those parties? I like to think more of that it's more of a collaborative effort. But even that perspective can change for so many people. It's part of the challenge.
Yeah. I think the same thing in terms of the hybridization. Great word, by the way. I don't know if
Thank
I
you.
can spell, but
There's your teacher talk buzzword for the day.
yeah, I'm gonna incorporate that into like 10 conversations tomorrow. That's our homework.
Well, I think it makes for an interesting conversation. I'm not going to spin this out into a larger one because we could have it, but we might be here for a few hours. Is the concept of like this perpetuating of the like expectations side of it, where it's like the expectation is like classical music, not necessarily anything else. Usually when you have people asking for expectations, it's that. I sometimes kind of feel like that adherence to that some people do have is something that kind of stagnates music a little bit. But like I said, I don't want to turn this into a huge other debate, because it could definitely be one.
Yeah, that
But,
definitely sounds like a topic we could really easily jump down that rabbit hole and have that be like a more like we kind of deliberate on that in another podcast.
This
Maybe
is
with Joe. All the reason to bring Joe back.
This is the
another
part
one.
where I go in the soapbox about why video game music gets frowned upon.
Oh yeah, let's not even get into that because we'll be here all night.
Let's get the marathon going, the energy drink. Here we go. Yeah. No.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Well, in the interest of keeping this on a reasonable time frame, all the better reason to kind of chop these topics up into several different, better reason to get us back into filming these more regularly. So we'll have to save some of those topics for another night. But that pretty much hits a lot of the topics on Joe's first two talking points here. So
I think the last one was on burnout, right?
Yeah, to an extent. I have the notes right here. Let's see. There's another aspect of having someone with such potential that from the teaching end takes discipline. I've had young students who can fly through their lesson books and would easily navigate anything I threw at them. I've had to learn the hard way about not impressing my own expectations and hopes as a performer on them, and to remember to go at a pace that doesn't burn them out or overlook the element of fun and balance. Everyone has different motivations for learning piano, and that's a delicate balance to align the parents, students, and the teachers' personal goals in a way that creates a clear way forward. It kind of, in a way, it ties directly into what we were just talking about, and it's also kind of another facet of this dilemma entirely. Joe, do you want to deliberate a little more on that?
Yeah, for sure. So I think, motivations come from the teacher too. I think part of it is, you see a student with an aptitude for it and just like crushing it, that there is excitement. And I think, I've been teaching for about 12-ish years. And I think what I was referring to was pretty early on, I had like a kindergarten student who was just crushing it. He just like songs and songs, understood everything, and maybe not as vocal as to what the goals were. I didn't necessarily establish them with the parents, and he seemed super happy to just keep progressing and doing a great job, but he wound up getting through book 3 really quickly, maybe less than a year, and they're doing a different activity after that. So it wasn't that it wasn't amicable. It was more that could have been a number of things, but I think in terms of taking accountability, that one thing I've had to learn is that it's a channel that expectation with expectation and excitement.
Yeah, like the match kind of burnt itself out really fast.
Yeah. So,
Joe, if you don't mind me asking, what book did you use with that particular student? Do you remember?
So at that time, I think it was Alfred, and I don't use that as much anymore. But at that point, they got through like the 1A, 1B. We're into through 2 and into 3, like within a year, and.
Yeah, that's extremely fast.
Yeah, that is
by my standards.
Like in kindergarten, it was super impressive.
Wow.
But
yeah, I've never had that.
Well, maybe they'll be at Carnegie Hall someday and say, "I'm glad that teacher Joe Kenny burnt me out, because I went with someone who paced it better." But I've learned a lot from that, and
that's good.
So
I think it brings an important point too, is that like and this is, I guess this is kind of where I was going before at the very end of the last topic, is that like it starts to get to the point with certain things musically where it's about like the accomplishment, and it's about the end of it rather than like the journey and the means and the having fun of it while you're doing it. Because and we've talked about this before, Danton, as well, that like there are varying degrees to the concept of like it's fun to be good. at some
Yeah.
points, you know, the point of constantly chasing the idea of being great at something um, can sap the fun out of it for some people. Quite a few people
Totally.
actually. And
Yeah.
I think the big thing there comes down to the idea that like, how do we find the way to impart the fun into it? Because like playing music's supposed to be fun. It's supposed to be enjoyable. I mean,
Yeah.
like for some folks, like it is about like the mastering of the instrument and like the performance aspect where like, yes, they are like the top of their field. But like,
That usually
I just
doesn't
want to
come
have
at
fun
the
playing.
outset, though. Usually, I mean, at least from my own experience, like I wasn't like 8 thinking I want to be a concert pianist. It was like I just want to explore music and learn more about how this stuff works because I hear these sounds I like in cartoons and video games, and there's a piano in the living room, and I keep going to it, and I want to know more about it. And over the course of many years, that stemmed into I want to be a professional musician and set that bar exceptionally high for myself. But it took a long time to develop that, and for me, it was really organic. And I feel like it's that way for a lot of other people too. And
Mhm.
at least that I've stemmed that into my own teaching where that happens for my students. Like there's an initial interest, we explore some basic material, and over the course of 2, 3, 5, 6 years, then it gets to a point where they really want to dive down that deep end or climb that really tall mountain.
Mhm.
But usually not from the beginning. It's usually a very gradual process. That's at least just my own perspective. I know that's not the only one, but
Yeah, I think even you had a student for 3 years, they start to turn a corner. There's a little bit of I've had a student who, through organic just excitement, like you're talking about, put way more practice time in the past few months and noticeable difference. A lot of is just really turning a corner in a way that um, they're developing into really a little performer with some
yeah,
impressive stuff
that's
and just
great.
a commitment to their stuff. And um, but even then, for me, it's a discipline. Like this excitement is here through that organic process, through their hard work and all that. And just remember to just kind of stay in that
How
place.
do we keep stoking that fire, and how do we feed the right kind of twigs to it to let it
Like
not
I talked earlier, like the
light up?
inspiration
Hmm.
probably significant than um, the specific means at some level. It's just the interpersonal and the inspiration from teachers is so important. And I think one of the things that I'm working on is um, as a teacher is to pace and channel the excitement when positive things happen, to build on it in a way that doesn't make the student feel pressure, that lets them enjoy not only their success but what they're exploring, and most importantly what they're expressing through
Mhm.
how whatever style or whatever piece or whatever synth in Russ's case they're doing. So
I think this is where like our passions as a teacher and as performers start to shine through and kind of really play a part is because like I know like the best teachers I had, and I don't mean like music teachers, I mean like teachers in general, were the ones who were like super excited about something that they were teaching. And like you could tell like they enjoyed what they were, talking about and they wanted you to enjoy it too. And as a student, when you see that, it's kind of like there must be something to this why they enjoy it so much. So I want to find that out. And as a teacher, it's like there's something I really enjoy about this, and I want my student to like learn about this. And I think that's kind of interesting too, because like, I mean, Dan, I know for you that concept was like, video game music was a big thing for you. I mean, I remember you telling me tales of like putting Donkey Kong Country on pause for, hours on end to learn
Yeah.
how to play the music for different levels. Like that kind of concept is like, it becomes a passion project, if you will.
Hmm.
And for students to see their teachers be that way about it too, I think plays a big part in helping to motivate them because they're like, my teacher's not just, I'm not just showing up every week and they're kind of showing me how to play this. It's like there's something they're really having fun with too, and they want me to have fun with it as well, you know?
Yeah, I know. For me, like with the video game music thing, it was exactly the opposite of what you were just talking about. Where I mean, my teacher, as fabulous and wonderful as he was,
Yeah.
grew up in a different generation, and he knew nothing about video game music. So I couldn't really ask him at least as a kid, I didn't think I could ask him about that stuff. I didn't think it would have been appropriate because we were going through method books, and then as we got into more advanced material, then he hit me with that same thing that a lot of teachers do, where they showcase something that they're really passionate about. In this case, he was a big progressive rock keyboard guy from the 70s, so that's where I got inundated with all of those things I would immediately come to love: Rick Wakeman, Keith Emerson, Jimmy Smith, Kansas, all of it. Like I remember one particular lesson going in, and he just had like a brown paper bag, and it was just lined with CDs. And you're like, here's your next lesson. Just take this home and listen to this stuff. And he had it all just labeled by hand. Rick Wakeman, Six Wives of Henry VIII, No Earthly Connection, Triumvirate, a German band.
Nice.
Sounds like ELP, and it didn't even have like what some of them had track listings on them, so I knew what the songs were. Some of them didn't. It was just like, all right, here's something. And it was basically his basic assignment was sort of, I know all of this music, I've played all of this music live in concerts, I want you to figure out, because he knew I had like a kind of knack for figuring things out by ear. So I think it was his way of making that connection with me. And it was basically, I know all of this stuff and I've played it all. Your job is to listen to it and try to figure it out, and then come play it for me next week, and I'll tell you what you get right and what you get wrong. And he basically like gave me like that really hard ear training from a pretty early age. Billy Joel, Elton John, all these great rock keyboard legends. I remember like doing transcriptions, like writing out stuff from like Rick Wakeman albums and like bringing him the sheet music by hand, and him like looking at it on a clipboard and like making corrections on it and stuff. But like, as far as like figuring out video game music, that was like an all me thing. That was like my own thing I did for myself, by myself, and for myself, where I didn't get that feed from a teacher that I think a lot of us aspire to feed our students, that sort of same thing. It's very interesting. I don't know.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Joe, and I'll ask a question after.
Yeah, Dan, I was just wondering, while you were learning the video game music, did you have that teacher that you were referring to?
Yeah, I had him from almost from day one. I had this younger lady for like my first couple of months that got me started when I was like, I want to say I was like 7 when I started lessons, and she was awesome, but she moved away. And then this guy, Matt, came and took her place, and I had him from that point until I went to college at Westchester. I had him for over 10 years. Every week, awesome. Friday nights, 5 o'clock. He was a big deal in my hometown growing up. He was one of the leading piano guys. He was just a wizard. He could do anything. He was awesome. And he unfortunately passed away just a few years ago. He had multitude of health issues, but it was great. We did this awesome benefit concert for him. All of like the local rock musicians and people that he's influenced came together and put on a huge benefit concert for his memory. And this was like right before COVID hit, so it was like perfectly timed, and it was this awesome swan song showcase of just by how many people showed up to this benefit was just a testament to how much of an icon this guy really was, and how many lives he touched, and how many musical journeys he served as a catalyst for. It wasn't just me. I was one of 200, he was awesome. But yeah, he was great. He taught me everything I knew before I went to Westchester.
And the passion you speak about it with, I mean, it sounds like it's super impactful. And
it was. Yeah.
And I feel like, him giving you such difficult tasks and to show implicit belief in you right in the beginning.
Yeah.
That maybe you were doing the video game stuff on your own, but I think to have such confidence instilled by someone you look up to like that, and
it was life-changing for me. It was it really was. At that point I knew, like, I want to go all the way with this. I want to go to college. I want to be a professional teacher. I want to do what I'm doing now. I knew that pretty early on. It was great. He was such a huge part of all of my learning. He really took it. Like I was able to, like you said, I was able to kind of get so far exploring the video game soundtracks on my own, but it really took off when he started me doing transcriptions of things I wasn't familiar with. And now it's at the point now where I kind of have that superpower that musicians dream of being able just to hear a song for the first time and be able to figure out what it is and just know right away what the chord progression is and what sort of scales you could use if you're soloing over it, know exact notes and melodies and be able just to write them down instantly. The things that they teach you in oral skills. Like I remember going into freshman year at Westchester feeling really confident. Like You should see the binders of stuff that Matt had me write up, man. Like, you could throw anything at me. And sure enough, I always found the oral training classes very easy because I've been doing all that stuff for years with Matt, and it was awesome.
So I do have a question though. I am curious. So had he not showed you half that prog rock stuff, do you think you would have gravitated towards it or found your way
I
to
don't
it?
know if I would have ever even discovered it because I live under a pretty big rock. So it really took him like handing me this pile of CDs and then like, oh, even I remember for the first couple of years, like just consuming it by listening to the CDs in the car and like having no idea of what Rick Wakeman looks like, or what his previous experience was. Like I was a little too naive to like really do that digging and research on my own of like, let's go on YouTube and look at a bunch of videos of him performing and let's look at even if it's like a wiki page of Keith Emerson and all the other things he's done with ELP. Like by the time I got into exploring those things, I was already like in college. So
Mhm.
and I don't know if I would have ever discovered some of that stuff if it wasn't for him. It really took him just kind of thrusting it upon me, and I'm glad he did because it really opened me up to lots of like, oh, there's all this really cool music out here that I didn't know existed, and I really like it, and now it's a big part of who I am. So
So Joe, kind of a similar question of sorts. Like, obviously, you do both classical and jazz as well. I know for most of us, usually like our first entrance to jazz is typically like if you encountered in like middle school or something like that, and you joined jazz band. Did you have a teacher who introduced you to it that kind of helped to build that passion for it for you, or was it something that was more of a self discovery? Or
Man, that's a loaded question. I think that
sorry,
how dare you now?
well, you can get on the
Um,
rocks for a bit, Joe.
yeah,
I
go
think.
for it.
Have fun.
um, yeah, so I think I started like like a lot of kids like with method books and more classical type of things, and then um, when I took like a liking to it and had a sense that it's something that was more of a natural fit, my dad would buy me. He was not a musician. My parents aren't musicians, but super supportive, and they buy me all these different books, and I would work through them and found that be, because he introduced me to his music, that he liked everything from Billy Joel to Cole Porter to he would grab movie books. My mom liked Barry Manilow, so he grabbed the Barry Manilow book.
Nice.
I was just inundated with a bunch of styles right away. Those Master Classics book and the 100 Best Ragtime. So all that I was integrating into my style early, and I certainly have my dad to thank for that. My parents for um, their support in whatever music I wanted to approach. And then I've had some great teachers at my high school. Shout out Strathaven Panthers in Wallingford. To the jazz bands there, and as us musicians, as we did at Westchester, and it gets clicky in high school too, like it is in college. You meet good friends along the way, and I joined a jam band in high school, still playing with some of the guys.
Oh,
So
really?
yeah,
I didn't know you went back to high school with some of those guys. Wow, that's amazing. Did not know that.
yes, yeah. I'm actually playing with a buddy later on who was a drummer we're in my band in high school, and I've just been fortunate to be immersed in all types of music from the beginning and just love all of it. And now my own songwriting, just trying to find a voice that blends everything together in an accessible way, but also in a way that's true to me. So, and I think that's the beauty in each student having different influences, and us hopefully being an inspiring one to help synthesize something super impactful and lasting for all our students.
I agree completely. I mean, like
Yeah,
I love the
absolutely.
fact that like you had that immersion in different types of music because I got it from my parents too. My father was he played pipe organ as a kid, and then wound up becoming a drummer in a rock band for the next 40 years from year like 17 on forward. But my mother was never really a musician of any sort, so I got these totally different musical influences from them. I get like all the rock stuff from my dad, and had a working memory, the Bee Gees greatest hits from my mother. Um, but at the same time, it's like it's kind of interesting because there again, it was a situation where like they were, you know, passionate about the type of music that they enjoyed and were proud to share it with me, which is the same thing we do as teachers as well. Like I can tell you right now, if you asked all my students what my favorite band is, they would tell you one of two bands basically, and they know it's either Rush or Genesis.
Wear it on your sleeve.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, the kicker is that like, you know, that I love the fact that like you had that immersion of all this different types of music, from like the ragtime to the film soundtracks, to the jazz, to the you know the like the adult contemporary stuff. I guess you would consider that for like Billy Joel and especially Barry Manilow. Um, the fact that like you had all that different stuff, it's cool to like, I think I'll be this type of like musician today. Like I want to listen to this type of stuff and learn
Put on
this
the
type of
different
thing.
hats. Yeah.
Exactly. Like you wear a bunch of different hats. And I think that's, I'm going to be super cliche when I say variety is the spice of life. And I'm already sad at myself that I went ahead and, but at the same concept, like it's very true. And like, I think that's, even relating back to the point of what you were talking about like pacing and burnout. I think that was kind of a subconscious strategy of mine personally when I was in college at West Chester, is that like I didn't want to just get, you know, I didn't want to pigeonhole myself into just one specific style of thing to do, because I knew if I did, I was going to burn out on it real fast to the point where I wouldn't want to deal with it again.
You'd get sick and tired of it before long. Right?
Exactly.
You wouldn't
because
be able
like
to make a long lasting career out of it.
not even the career side of it. I just don't want to burn out an enjoyment of music. Like music's supposed to be something you have fun being a part of and doing. And, you know, it's, you know, the nice part is being able to make a career out of it. That's like a dream for all of us. That's, I mean, that's, we're basically trying to turn our passion into a career, which, you know, always winds up having to different varying degrees of success and different varying degrees of compromise. But like, I think the big thing there is that, and this is one of the reasons it feels like I'm like constantly rounding back to that whole, like, you know, having like super heavy expectations from like the parents I've been on some students, is that like, it's supposed to be something enjoyable. It's supposed to be something you like, and that they enjoy doing as much as you do. And I think that's why like it's awesome that like your students, yours Dan, yours Joe, that they get to see you guys passionate about what you're playing, about what you're working on, about what you're writing. I mean, the fact that you have a student of yours, Joe, who's picking up on your like soloing idioms. I mean, I always harken back to a quote from Neil Peart, drummer from Rush, where he basically said like, the greatest thing you can do for somebody is to inspire them. What greater thing can you do for another person but to inspire them? And, you know, having all those different passions inspires other people, because they're like, wow, they really love this stuff. I want to find out why, you know? So.
Yeah, it definitely motivates you to dig a little deeper too.
Yeah.
You know, like why does this person find this so interesting? Why are they so excited about this? Like, what is it that I'm missing? Let me look into it a little further. And then when the student discovers that, it like opens up a whole can of worms and lets them really explore. You know, it worked for me, you know, like, who's this Rick Wakeman guy? Whoa, oh, okay. You know, like, and then really getting into him, and it's still a very refreshing experience even to this day for me. And it was a big part of it was because my teacher was so passionate about it. He loved it so much. And, you know, again, he wore it on his sleeve. Like he knew exactly what style of musician he was, and he just leaned hard into that, and it worked. He played to his strengths. And that kind of ties into like one of the strategies that you other teachers watching this can take away from this, where when you're presented with a situation like this, you have a student that challenges your abilities. That's, at least from my own personal experience, I could say that's one of my pieces of advice, is to play to your strengths. You know, if you find you're a particularly strong reader, you do more with reading in the lessons. If you find, like in Joe's case, he's always had a really strong theory background, so he leans hard into that for all of his students, especially the ones like this that challenge him a lot. So that's one strategy you can use that is potentially very effective. Again, provided that the chemistry between the student and the teacher is tight and it's going to work great. If not, then having the maturity and the decency to recognize maybe the student is better fit with some other teacher in my network, where then having a nice big network of lots of different teachers who can do lots of different things is also very helpful. So um, I'm looking forward to seeing this channel grow in the future, where we eventually can have a little more of that dialogue between ourselves and Joe and the likes of many others like him, and we can kind of have that nice little pool of, oh, send people to Steve and to Joe and to Ronnie and to whoever, and and kind of find who are people that demonstrate different strengths in a lot of different regards, and who, because the more we do that, the more, especially all of us musicians recovering from this pandemic, the more we can collaborate and work together and find things that we're passionate about and find things to talk about, the better. So
Well said.
thank you. Joe, do you have any final thoughts?
This has been a blast, and
I'm so glad you enjoyed it, man. It was great to see you again.
yeah, it's great to see you guys, and not to invite myself back, but we're gonna have to do a sports
Oh, we got to have you back for way more than just a sports podcast. We have so much more here we could talk about. I feel like we could keep going.
Oh, I would absolutely do a sports one and have Danton sit off to the
We
side
could totally
and
do
be
one just for fun. I'm
Oh my
totally not opposed to that. That
I'm
would be a lot of fun. I mean, I won't have much to say on that one, unfortunately, but I'll just kind of crack jokes and grease the wheels a little bit and ask questions, because I don't know jack about sports.
But Danton, so in all seriousness, you summed everything up just beautifully there about inspiration, and about, in your past comment, about inspiration, and about the crux being more than X's and O's, so being more about inspiring somebody and community as teachers, building, putting the ego aside, and it's important for everyone to help shape the narrative, and that, Russ has a great ability with synths. I'd pass somebody on to him that is looking for that expertise, and Danton, you're versatile, like if, video game music in the same realm, but also juxtapose that with the idea of, we're still learning as teachers. We're all learning, and we all
absolutely.
As teachers, we're lifelong students, really.
Yeah,
we're never
I think
done.
embracing that side is important, and I know from you two, at least in this conversation, it's just super inspiring to be with like-minded people who are, hungry to know how we can do a better job to serve the people that we teach, and to grow a music community in the next generation while we're still learning things, transcribing different solos. We're finding our next Rick Wakeman in 2022 who inspires us, all that stuff. So it's inspiring for me, and hopefully it inspired some people out there today. And thank you guys for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks again for reaching out. We would love to have you back for further podcasts, other topics. We definitely have a lot of different things we could cover. So those of you who are watching, you know the call to action: like, comment, subscribe. If you have any experiences you could tap into yourself, better than even commenting on, once we post this to YouTube, you'll be able to comment on it. But better yet, you could even post, if you're not a member, join the Teacher Talk with Doc Rocker Facebook group. We have a huge network of tons of teachers, many of whom are based in the Westchester area, because that's where we got started. But there's even a few that stem in from other places that are on there, members of that group. Post your thoughts. We'll post this video on there for people to check out once it's ready. And yeah, I'm looking forward to talking more.
Oh, absolutely. I can't wait for the sports one. I can't wait to rip into Philadelphia sports.
Excited, boys. Really excited.
Well, seriously, thank you, Joe. Thank you for coming on. And dude, I would love to have you back at any time. I love these kind of conversations.
Me too.
Like I said, music's supposed to be a good time.
This was so fun, guys. Can't wait to do it again. Thanks again.
Thank you, Joe.